Hello, hello.
I'm not sure. Has it been connected to everyone else? It's supposed to be on video conference for the other branches.
Yeah.
It's connected?
He will do it upstairs. He will do it. The one guy, no problem.
Okay, he's doing it, yeah?
Yeah.
No worries.
Wait, I will talk to him.
Sure.
Imran bhai?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure today to introduce to you Ms. Caroline ENNIS, who is going to present to us a talk about digital teaching, learning in a blended environment. Ms. Caroline comes from the University of Westminster, and she's a senior lecturer. She participated in various conferences, and therefore she has developed so much her interest in blended learning, particularly, and in designing curriculum, and in particularly in designing what we call some kind of innovative approach to teaching in a blended environment, particularly in this era that is very much famous for being an era of development in terms of technological development, and therefore to use this technology in the classroom particularly, and when most of the even traditional universities are blending now. This is the reason her interest in research is particularly in developing those course contents in a very engaging way to her students. So today she's going to share her knowledge with us in these perspectives. So the floor is yours, Ms. Caroline, please.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to learn so much about how the Open University is operating in your region. And as Shekra mentioned, my work, my whole kind of philosophy for life is about allowing people to access and develop their potential through learning opportunities, whether they be academic, practical, social. And so life is about learning and growing and developing, and that lies behind a lot of what I do. I love teaching, and I love students. They have so much to offer, so much opportunity lies ahead for them, and the fourth industrial age gives them opportunities that I have not been able to fully appreciate, but I try to do as much as I can. I come from an era where it was everything about chalk and talk. Everything was about listening and only learning through the listening process and then writing it up. Now the opportunities are so much more engaging for students. And in the future, the co-creation of that learning design is where we will be going. We're getting closer and closer to what the student does and what the student needs to enable them to move that forward. So I have lots of things that you can get if you Google me. I have open access to articles that I've written. I'll leave my email if you wish to get in touch with me in the future. It will be wonderful to have discussions or even do some research and writing. So please, if you're interested, take that forward. So starting from the beginning, and McGraw-Hill Education. I've been fortunate enough to work with McGraw-Hill since 2017, and looking at the tools that they have and the opportunities that we had for learning for our students at University of Westminster, which has a very large cohort number, huge cohort sizes of groups of students. So I would be managing 700 students in a cohort. So the use of digital technology and the change of learning in that digital environment in the universities meant that actually I had to move this forward. Actually, I was quite resistant as well. So I have slides on those stories, but I won't go into too much detail, but I'm very happy to share those with you in the future. But for me anyway, coincidentally, my key text that I'm using at the moment for my writing is a McGraw-Hill publication. It's a tangible printed copy, which I still very much value. And what it's given me is what comes from the idea of constructive approaches to what we do with the design of our learning, which will be included in the content today. So let's get this technology going. So we're going to talk about digital transformation, going to think about making a difference. We're going to look at the difference between using information technology and educational technology and how those are doing either what we call a transmission approach to teaching or a constructive approach to teaching, and some ideas and some videos embedded within the session today. But what's really important within the Arab Open University is the idea of contributing to science and the knowledge society that we're living within today. And of course, digital transformation gives us ways of doing things. It hopefully makes it easier, and it makes learning more accessible for students, and the flexibility in the way that you can access that learning. So you are no longer required to come and sit in front of me. We're linking out to other regions, other possibilities. There will be recordings. So it's not essential that you have to spend time traveling and worrying. You can sit at your desktop, get it open, and get it ready. I do realize that in some parts of the world, the infrastructure and the development of the capability in information technology does mean that there are slight restrictions. And in the way that we design things, ultimately, some of the more recent versions of software are not necessarily compatible with the hardware devices that our students have. So one of the things we have to think about is what might be compromising access to student learning if we're using hyper new equipment and hyper new software. Then unfortunately it may not be fully accessible. And actually this happens in other means, in other public services. I've done some research in the public healthcare services in the UK and the access to patient information and patient services through the use of information technology, and how this digital transformation gave the promise of absolute quality of service. Unfortunately, the developments in different parts of the UK mean that it's not fully accessible and fully functional, and so we shouldn't assume that. And actually, in so much of what we do in learning, we should not assume that we know that that's the way it's going to work for everyone. We may believe it's a possibility, but it isn't necessarily the case. But what we really want to be able to achieve is quality and consistency. And that quality that sets out what you should be expecting, what your teaching profiles should be able to offer the students through recruitment of a wide body of staff that have many great characteristics and qualities to offer student learning and student participation. Because in the end, we want students to be part of that and feeling that they are very much involved in the process. And that's what I believe in. Without the student, we have nothing to give. We need them to be in this with us. And so I was really lucky to be able to find your opening address and the congratulations to newcoming and incoming students and how they're made to feel when they enter the experience of learning. And so looking at who's important at the top and the strategic intentions of your organisations is how we then get to this operational level to see how do we follow this through. Our leadership and our vision is really important. and what is the importance of higher education within our society, and what is our role, and how are we then moving towards flipping our classroom over to the students, having them take forward from that welcome, and then at the end of that welcome and at the end of their learning still be very much smiling. Although one of the things I do say is students aren't necessarily here to be happy, and the learning process won't always make you happy, and it will challenge you many times. But actually, what you achieve from it is meeting your potential, and sometimes challenging your potential, challenging the arguments in the classroom, challenging the modes and the theories that your teachers are talking about, but feeling confident that you have that kind of participation, that engagement to be able to do so. So later on in the session today, we'll have a look at some blended learning and some flipping and what it means to us, and as academics, how it's making a difference to our role. I'm just going to get some water. Sorry. So then, we know that we're at the highest level and stage of learning. We've identified that we exist within a learning society, and we often refer to this as the knowledge society. And once again, reminding you of your vision and mission for the future and how important it is to understand where we are going and how we take this forward as an organisation and as a global economy and as an important part of the world and what the world has to offer. Doing this one. Thank you. So Open University then has moved a long way. Hang on a sec, I think I missed one. Bear with me. Oh no, I haven't missed it. The way I've made my book is such that it's very cleverly designed, but I have to figure out how to use it. Okay, so here we go. Yeah, so Open University's existed for 50 years, much newer in this region, and actually the idea of distance learning and the broad scope of the regions that you have to cover means that the open way of learning and the open access to learning is an ideal way to do it, and using digital tools to do that is the way that you can embrace that knowledge society. We're going to run a video that shows this in context in the UK. Picking up here, the idea that the learning takes place almost at the convenience of the student, and where we begin to see that learning becomes very much, in a way, a natural activity as opposed to a structured, formal one, and learning begins to be a social situation more and more. In the UK, one of the things that we did in the design of learning in the University of Westminster was actually take away the barriers between the social space and the learning space. But actually, it has presented some problems. So one of the things we did was we would have had a building with a quadrant style. So the centre part of the building was open air, and it had its four sides. In the centre was open space for fresh air. They turned that into a learning podium, and the walls around those four sides were turned to glass. So there was a limited barrier between the learning space and the social space. The problem that presented was the students' ability to turn from being social to being more formal in the classroom. And so, as teachers, we had to identify with the fact that that's what was likely to happen. So our teaching had to become more informal. It's taken a bit of time to embrace that, and it's been 7 years at Westminster. And there are some people that say that the glass walls in the corridors are a distraction to the students because they're sitting in class and they're often just seeing who's walking along the way, because that's what we tend to do as humans. We can't help ourselves and looking to see what's going on around us. But let's see what's happening in the UK. This should link directly, but let's hope it does.
The air is designed to provide an opportunity for those who, for one reason or another, have not been able to take advantages of higher education.
Let's say you're one of those people. One of those who think where you start in life shouldn't limit where you go. One of those who think a university shouldn't just be, well, a university. Let's say you're one of us, and together we are the Open University. Open to all of us, all of the time. Not some of us, some of the time. We are a movement of millions, a mission of one. We are disruptors, occasional troublemakers, game changers. We are the fuel for imagination, chasing comets, making the impossible possible. We are restless in our drive to see progress that touches us all, inspiring students to become ministers and midwives, barristers and teachers, tech entrepreneurs, business gurus, and more. Our cause goes beyond being an innovative way of learning, and our future lies in continuing to build that cause. We are the people who open up the future of learning. This is how we shape the future. Let's say you are one of those people who believe what we believe, one of those excited by possibility. Let's say you are one of us. We can't wait to open up millions of futures, and with your help, we can.
When you embed videos, it does something to PowerPoint that means that your usual tools won't necessarily work. So technology is great, except sometimes you can't figure out why on your home fancy PC it will run brilliantly, and that's what we tend to do as tutors. We're designing in one space and delivering on another machine with its own incompatibility issues. So we have to be able to just click here or do this or try something different. So I looked at how we were designing. I looked at the way the materials are put together within the learning management system. You often see that students' tools are quite similar. I've had experience of Learn Direct, which is an original learning platform within the UK public service learning, and a lot of provision for foundation learning. I've been able to use our Moodle platform, which some people may be familiar with. I use the Blackboard platform. I've written papers when I was doing my teaching qualification about the use of Blackboard and asynchronous and synchronous discussion systems. And so I've had quite a lot of background in different learning management systems. And when you look at operations management, so that's the discipline that I teach in, one of the things that's really important is the use of color coding to direct users of into a particular process. So you can then imagine that I really was quite impressed with when I saw what was going on with the learning management system here. So there's browsing the courses, sharing the forums, chatting, submitting your assessments, grading online. And so this is a really nice way to identify for the students what's going on, because the way the brain works isn't just in the written form, it's often in the use of colour and then the use of icons. So you'll see that a lot in learning design, and what we're moving towards is a much more simple process, a much less text within the content, and because that's quicker for us. And actually what students want is just click and go. They want to sit at their system and be directed straight into exactly what is useful. They don't want to see the useless. Oops. Okay. So then, thinking about what happens within the student and learning process and how we think about our capability as an organisation and our capability as individuals, and the difference that it makes. And this is coming across in what's being said for your 25,000 students. We need staff capability, we need compatibility within our systems, and we need the role of the teacher to shift towards the one of the supporter. We hear different terms. You might hear yourself being called the facilitator, you might hear yourself being called the convener, you might hear yourself being called the guidance person, and sometimes the guide on the side. Whilst that is an okay term, I think that in a way gives you quite a negative perspective. So I think the one of the Socratic supporter is the one that I prefer in terms of learning philosophy. Let's gather round and discuss this and talk about what it is we're trying to help you learn. Back in the day, and of course in Oxford and Cambridge in the UK, you may have well been able to adopt a very Socratic approach. You have a very large lecture, and then you'll take 6 or 7 students, or anything up to 12 students, and talk to them in a small group, and get very close to what individuals are talking about. That is not the offer that we're necessarily able to give to a larger and growing population of learners. And so we need to look at the way the digital tools can give that, and discussion groups and forums, and that identification of student capability through what we can see and identify through the learning and assessment process gives us the opportunity to return to some of that in a slightly different way, though. So when we come back to what Biggs is talking about then, in moving towards this role, and he sees this as being in certain levels, and this is my favourite text. I've been looking at this one now since 2011 and constantly come back to it. There's the original versions back in '97 when Biggs was talking about what you do in your role, and how what is becoming more of an important aspect is what the student doing, not what you're doing. Because actually it's not really about me, it's about you. And when I do my lectures, I walk around, I remember students and what they discussed with me last week. It does make them a little bit nervous sometimes. Oh my goodness, is she going to pick on me again? But if you've had something very interesting, or even something debatable that was brought up in a lecture in the previous week, I absolutely take on board what your argument is, and what it is you're trying to kind of consider, and how it is you might be approaching it, because I do not assume to be the one that's got it perfectly right. The theories and models are given to us as a quite solid example of how things might be, but actually they might be slightly different too. So Biggs looks at this. He says the way for you to progress with students is to think less about what you're doing as the teacher, but more what the student's doing, and how we're diversifying our role, and how we're using constructive approaches to learning and doing what he's calling constructive alignment, where we align the content with the assessment process to enable those to be meeting our learning outcomes, which is how we design our courses in the outset. So he talks about constructivism and constructive approaches to teaching, and he talks about something known as constructive alignment. So you can read about those two things. You hear a lot about constructivism, building things in a certain way, putting things together that then, particularly for learning, allow that content to align with the assessment process. Within what we did at the University of Westminster, it was really, really provocative. 700 students, where there would be quite an expensive outlay for the cost of the materials to have a game included in the process for learning. But this was about management learning. This was about undertaking management activity where you would become a production manager in a simulated world and make the decisions like you would in the real world, and the consequence of which would make a difference to your quality of service, your profitability, and hopefully your ability to engage with contractual arrangements with your customers in the future. And this is what we were trying to teach students. And it began to make a difference because they would talk to me in the classroom about the decisions that they'd made and say, well, I decided to ship out the manufactured goods ahead of time. So instead of waiting for 3 weeks, they waited for 2 weeks for their goods. And my customers were really happy, and I got a really high quality score. Well, what does that mean? And then you begin to say to them, well, this is about you getting continuing business. This is about how the real world operates, not just according to only getting it there exactly on time, the difference that you make if you do things in different ways. So they began to understand things. And in the end, the students began to realize that this was about what they were doing, not about what I was teaching. That was really hard for me too, because Amanda, their virtual teacher, became the one that was important to them. She's not a real person, but they behaved as though she was. So they would come and talk to me in the classroom and say, Amanda says, and I, yeah, okay, let's talk about that then. And it became much more engaging. So we're talking about designing our learning. We're talking about benefiting from scholarly software that we are able to use. And there are some great tools out there. Google Scholar is excellent. Grammarly is excellent. Mendeley is excellent. So if anyone wants to talk to me about the different tools that you can use in your practice and that can help students become more scholarly, there's some great tools there. But what we were doing was creating this path through the learning towards assessment. Another really good resource base is EduCourse. You can actually create your own domain there as well. They do charge for it, so it's a commercial venture. It appears to be I'm not sure how they make. I think what they're tending to do is pay for premium in a way that they want to share the education tools in the digital world, so you can pay for premium. But I think obviously they want to commercialize parts of it too. And that's often the case with software that's provided free of charge, where you can then have add-ons to commercial venture for that. But ultimately it's about embracing that digital transformation and moving forward with what we do, and the tools and the access that we have to those are extensive now. And sometimes it gets very confusing in trying to decide which ones might be most suitable to use, because if you're trying to use reference tools and you've got RefWorks that's not compatible fully, and you've got Mendeley, and you've got ResearchGate that you can use for some of your work, and you may have your own embedded tools within your own institutions. So we're thinking then about the emphasis and designing learning that embraces that educational technology. And so your technocratic capability is what will take you forward. It won't hold you back, actually, either, if you don't have fantastic technological capability. If you're willing to embrace the opportunities for learning and getting support with that, then that's what will help both you, your students, your colleagues be able to embrace this and be able to overcome these challenges together. There are so many different peculiarities that you get on a day-to-day basis with the use of technology and the use of digital learning tools. You cannot possibly know the answer to all of them. And so we have things like frequently asked questions, we have faculty support, which is what I do for McGraw-Hill Education. So new implementers can come to me and say, I would like to include some efficiency content within my operations management course. How do I use that particular learning content to teach this learning outcome? So we work on it together based on the way I see that might be done, the way my colleague in another institution sees that might be done. So the growing degree of partnership between yourself, the materials provider, whichever one of the materials providers that you use, and colleagues that are using it in other institutions, is where the value, what we're calling the value ecosystem, and the barriers are broken down, so the learning is happening in a much wider field. And that is the way forward for education, to be able to embrace that as well. And of course, open universities exactly through that principle. So for them, nothing really has changed that much. There is so much to do and learn, and once again reminding you that if you wish to, EduCores have some great 7 tips too, so you can do a checklist on those ones. And in the background, McGraw-Hill can support you. And I can speak from personal experience that the colleagues that I've met around the world now with McGraw-Hill Education, and having a number of years working in many different organisations, are definitely the nicest people I have ever worked with. I'm not just saying that because I'm here today with them, Akash. They are genuinely the nicest people I've ever worked for, and I tend to work on a consultancy-based approach, so I'll take a permanent post and then I'll work in other places, but I never take a full-time permanent post in any one institution, because actually what I want to be able to do is to share. Although that actually causes a little bit of problem, because the uncertainty it brings to an institution within which you want to place yourself. So I placed myself within the University of Westminster, and I, if anything, go above and beyond to try and bring the message about the ideas that they have for what they do with their students. So I would tweet for them. I would try and do as much as I can for them above and beyond my kind of responsibilities. So the role and responsibilities has been more than some academics might have. But that's perhaps because of the type of person that I am and how I see my role and responsibilities. Let's move then into information technology and how those characteristics are supplementary, complementary, and supporting educational technology. So if we look at how we define it, and then how we can explore educational support for students, and moving towards that level 3 and focus 3 perspective, and that constructive approach and that constructive alignment. So, of course, if we can't trust in our information technology system, we can't do anything on a day-to-day basis. So when it fails us, we can't get on with our job. And we've seen that in the UK, when British Airways system shuts down, we can no longer do processing of customers. But what we're doing in the blanket use of information out still brings a surface approach and not a deepening approach to understanding for students. So it becomes purely output information. That provides a base of information quite often that then students can use to enable them to put together a piece of work. So they surf the internet to put together an assignment. Actually, I have no problem with students surfing the internet. It's just that they don't know the difference between what is a credible piece of information, which can be substantiated as a fact upon which they can develop arguments, and those that are not. So the great thing about educational technology is it can give you the direct link to exactly what you wish your students to read. And you can do the reading list as you would have done in the traditional means of you must read this textbook and this chapter and this page, and requiring the students to cite that within their written work, because we still have so much written work. What we want to do is move that focus, and we begin to look at educational technology and the managing of that learning, engaging of that learning with students, and the development activities that we have along their journey, the assessment in the formative and summative way, and that distance and off-campus teaching and how important that is to us, particularly within Open University, and the infrastructure and the design. And it's the literature tells us that actually distance only with no human intervention is a very lonely place to be for students and for academics. And certainly from my perspective, it means that you sit behind a desk all day, you do very limited physical activity, you are almost drawn into the fact that there's so much more you could access through your accessibility to open source information that you end up probably going over and above what you probably should be doing in accessing information online. So in a way, some of the new developments in our software, in our hardware devices, I use iPhone now, tells you how much time you've spent on social media, how much time you've spent on emails, how much. So here you go, those tools are helping us see what are we doing in our day-to-day activities. So those are great. I really like those. Managing our learning. So we've got administration processes, we've got embedded and integrated information about students' progress, students' previous marks, students' attendance, and all of that is used in student engagement and student profiling, although the degree to which that is used as a kind of not necessarily controlling, but a surveillance activity, and the role that the tutor has in that is one thing that we're trying to have a discussion about. I was in Dubrovnik in July, and what we're saying is it's fantastic because we can see exactly when we might need to intervene for a student. But actually, it's kind of watching a lot, and they may well say to you, well, actually, miss, I download my content, and the time that I spend learning is offline, not online. So we shouldn't then be assuming that the online time is the thing that we need to account for in terms of student contribution. So those are debates that we'll be looking at in the future. But actually, the idea of having a carefully planned platform as you have, and a nice color-coded one, allows access to the overarching information that students need, the information about their institution and their course. It's very much information-driven, but it's about managing the learner's expectation, what they need to do to begin their processing. And also, the ideas that we can use these as communication channels and information communication channels are excellent, except what students are saying to me is, there is just too much communication. You send me an email about this event, then I get a flag up on Blackboard about this event, then I get something else that's also related to this event, and I appear to read the same thing 3 times. So we need to be careful in how we use that as well. So if we're using, I like if your learner management system is a point of access that could be used for, the student knows that they only need to go there, that they won't be all these other places that the same thing appears to come from. So that's quite an important part of that. We have ebooks. Who uses ebooks? Who likes ebooks? You can keep 2 hands up, okay. But who still uses good old-fashioned print text? Actually, it's really good because since the popularity of ebooks has gone up, the popularity of print books has increased. So that means people are reading. That's what's important. E-journals, so your articles, open access quite often. And those are great because in our university, we can direct link to the precise journals that we wish for students to read. And we have a platform of library access that tells you exactly how many times those articles have been accessed. It doesn't always tell you how much reading has taken place. With the books, we can tell how much reading has taken place, how many pages have been looked at. And I share that with the students because I'll work out the numbers for them. There are 700 of you. There are 1,500 hits on the book. That means perhaps each of you did it 2 times, or some of you did it none, and some of you did it 4, that sort of thing. So they begin to see that there's a responsibility now with them. And that's actually really quite nice. Although for some it's not so nice, and I get that, I completely get that. Web links to important websites, important information that you can embed into your slides quite easily. Although some slides, presentation rooms actually protect security and stop these things coming through. So you can do that, though, through your design of your learning platforms. You can embed, and you can have your mashups, you can have your embedded videos, all sorts of things that you can actually do to try and avert any problems that come about that. It still has a bit of a tendency, though, towards transmission, although smart books that we'll have a look at stops that activity. we must still be there to support the students for exactly what they need to be able to gain from it. Because ultimately, what's useful and what's not. And students increasingly say, I don't want to spend time reading all of this. And so what happened at Westminster was we had a 500-page textbook. And feedback from students in co-creation, they said, please, do we not have to read so much? They now have a textbook of 152 pages using McGraw-Hill's Create, and you basically choose everything you want. Then you can design your lecture series around that. And so this idea that learning was only about reading, and that to meet the course requirements for design, you had to have pages and pages of content that would take that 200 hours of study. The idea of using games where the students are engaging and reading is still learning time. It doesn't have to all be reading. Responding to web questionnaires, responding to kind of discussion is all included in that learning. And that's one of the trickiest things. How do you design it so that you can see it takes the number of hours that should be given credit once they qualify with that particular module or that particular degree? Oops. So assessment task design, some of my colleagues find that one of the trickiest things to do. And so I support them a lot in how to do that, how to think about what to include and how to teach for that inclusion and how to support along the journey. I love automatic marking, so we have embedded tools for multiple choice questions, and you can link to some of those that are downloaded from textbooks. One of the things we need to remember, though, is that this takes a huge amount of effort. Really does take an awful lot of time to design all of this, and that actually the benefits take a long time to realize. So if you're designing a program that will run for 5 years, you will spend a lot of time at the beginning, obviously, and then it will come to fruition over that time, and hopefully you don't need to tweak it too much. So you really want to be in that role for 5 years to be able to get the benefit of it. You can use assessing learning for building portfolios and having interventions, and of course the originality checks. And so the design of different content that can go into the assessment process and the credit that those students might have, for example, from using a game to learn operations management, is that you then have to design an activity that takes from what they've got from the learning in the game and the outcome in the game, but not necessarily saying your game score is your mark, because students would find that really difficult, because they would find the worry about learning to only achieve a high mark in the game, because that's related directly to their assessment mark. So what we found was students would then reflect on what they were doing and what they were learning. So they begin to talk about their learning and their capability within the management operations role. And then you would give them some questions. So you design it in maybe a portfolio of evidence. So give me your score. That doesn't make your mark. You then reflect on how well you did as a manager, and how, if you didn't do so well, what you might need to do based on the theory of that practice to develop your skills and your profitability and quality. And then to be able to do a couple of questions. Question one on supply chain strategy and how that worked within what you were doing. Question two on something like access to raw materials and sustainability within the world for raw materials, so that we could bring in the new needs for learning, as well as use the game. So it can be tricky, but it's not impossible. It just takes some access to thinking about it, but access to students to support you to do so. So when we're thinking then about being off campus, and we can do discussions, we can make them happen in the same time and space or we can make them happen at later times, and we can set timings, and we can allow students to engage with that, say, for a week on a particular topic. Those work really well, but they need intervention and support from your tutor, a moderator. And whether you choose to allow students to post anonymously or not can be another factor in that. Of course, we can reach a very wide audience. It's how many moderators you need in the background to be able to facilitate that is quite important. But it's flexible for students in being able to provide for them access to their learning at the point and time and place that they wish to do so within the time frame of particular courses. But also the fact that if a student has difficulty, some of our students have difficulty with finding somewhere to sit in an auditorium and wish to move around quite a lot. So they're quite anxious in the learning space, but not anxious off-site. So that allows them to do their learning in the way that's more suitable to them. So it's much more inclusive. We do still rely quite a lot on transmission, though. So Biggs says, though, that it's good for us because it's supplementary, but it's not foolproof. You don't need to be a technocrat. You just need to know how to find out and get support from your colleagues and your specialist teams. And it doesn't necessarily need to still keep doing this mass transmission. So with thinking about it, if you've got basic skills in IT, it's really hard, I think, to do educational technological developments. But there's no reason why you can't develop those and work with your colleagues as teams, which I've done a lot with my colleagues, and then let them embrace it, let them practice, and then move on and help others. But you do need to know a lot about course design and about the ways to do this and how to embed lecture series with assessment activities and what happens in week 1. Then there's a follow-on of what happens in week 2, but you can remind students of what they've already learned. So there's quite a lot of that going on. So there is that effort. And then establishing efficiency takes quite a lot of effort too. Sometimes within particularly online learning, students able to access it to do with the number of students on mass delivery can cause network capacity issues. And sometimes with very, very, very large audiences of students, and some of the Liverpool University, for example, deliver an MBA course to 10,000 students, and they find it quite hard to get the quality of the processing, particularly for the assessment processing, to be a standardised approach to what they do. And so the quality control can be a challenge, although they are overcoming it. Of course, there are issues around the content that you use and who owns the copyrights for those. And then, of course, the security of the data that we use, and actually the access and the rights that we have to some of those things that we do within our role as well. So let's have a look at flipping the classroom, because that's actually what we really want to find out so much more about. Flipping what happens in the learning out to the learner. It's not a new idea, because after all, Open University has been going for 50 years now. In the UK, we have quite a lot of initiatives in moving that forward, and what digital capability has given us, particularly in being able to collaborate more in the future with students. And so here's a short video that will explore that, and it stops you having to listen to me for too much time as well. Bear with me while this is loading. Oh, we should get it now.
This is a classroom. The teacher stands at the front, and the students watch and listen. You'll recognize this because it's probably how you were taught and how your parents were taught before you. But there are a lot of problems with this approach to teaching. You see, not all students learn at the same speed, so some get left behind. And while some students learn better by listening, others may learn better by doing. This means that teachers can't always do the best job they can. But there is another way. The flipped classroom addresses these problems and makes learning more personal. First, the teacher makes a video that delivers the content they'd usually teach in class. Then they share it online with students who can watch it before the next lesson. This leaves the teacher free to spend class time leading activities that help students apply the knowledge. Students can rewind and re-watch a video as many times as they like and come back to class with questions for the teacher. So keeping up with the class is no longer an issue. Students can access the video at any time using mobile devices, giving them the ability to learn more independently. Instead of sitting and listening, students can spend class time applying knowledge in more practical ways. And teachers are free to spend their time working with students and giving them individual support and attention. The flipped classroom model is already making a difference to students and teachers worldwide, so get involved. Discover more at flippedinstitute.org and become part of the movement.
The next one will give us some tips how to actually facilitate this. So much of what we've talked about already about learning design has required us to think about this differently, and that is necessarily that flipped classroom. Although I kind of think that, again, it's another term I don't necessarily like. What comes out of that first video is the idea of the student becoming independent. I think always the student was independent. It was just the way that we approached who they were that made them not. And the whole idea of pedagogy perhaps is maybe not the right one. And if you look at what Andrew Knowles talks about andragogy, treating the learner as if they're an adult. Pedagogy assumes that they're a child. So we need to provoke independence and still be valued by the student in the role that we have. So in a way, it's sort of us being a little bit cautious about who we are, less about them being worried about who they are. So this is a great one because it gives you some tips on how to embrace the content and the design.
Here are some tips to overcome some of the hurdles and blunders that we've seen commonly happen as teachers flip their classrooms.
Make sure your students can access the content. We all know that not all students have access to the internet at their home, so you may have to come up with some other solutions. Get some flash drives, check them out to students, burn the video content onto DVDs, or write a grant, get a class set of some sort of digital device that you can check out to your students and they can take home and use that way.
Make sure you teach your students how to watch a video. You say, my kids know how to watch a video. Yes, they know how to watch Spider-Man, but that's not the same as watching an educational video that you've created for them to watch. Ultimately, you're trying to teach them how to interact with the video content in a meaningful way that causes them to reflect and think through what they're being exposed to. I had a conversation with a 6th grade teacher, and he said, I spent 3 weeks teaching my students how to watch a video. He had, little guys, 12-year-olds. I had 16-year-olds. It makes a huge difference based on the maturity of the kids and what they are ready and prepared to learn.
Keep in mind that the length of the videos does matter. Our rule of thumb is 1 to 1.5 minutes per grade level that the students are in. So a 4th grade student, you're talking 4 to 6 minutes max. A 10th grade student, 10 to 15 maximum. Keep it short, and if you need to make more videos that are short, that's better than making fewer videos that are long. Another question that a lot of teachers ask is, what do I do if students show up to my class and they haven't viewed the content? Well, let's be real here. I mean, there are kids who are going to show up to any classroom who haven't done their homework. That's just a reality that we live in as educators. It's really not that different in a flipped classroom, but there are ways that you can safeguard or build in some steps to keep kids engaged while they're viewing the content and that you can use to check to see if they have. We took the low-tech approach. We just wanted to see some notes. Other teachers are embedding these videos onto a web page and embedding like a Google form underneath it to collect some data from the students, having them answer some questions. You could just pose a question in the video themselves and have the students bring the answer to that question as an entrance ticket into class. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can check to see if students actually did their work, and then you as a teacher, as an educator, will just hold them accountable for that.
Ultimately, I think the key is that you hold kids accountable. If they've made the poor choice of not doing the work, then what you're going to do is you're going to take that time and you're going to say, you now have to watch the video in class while the other kids are getting help on the hard stuff.
So some teachers get a little intimidated by this idea of creating their own videos. Really, you don't need a super duper studio. You don't need to worry about high dollar cameras and things like that. But there are a few techniques that you can do to really improve the quality of your stuff. So sit in a room with good lights, have a nice quiet area to work, and don't have a distracting background. Have it something nice and simple. Those are things that you can introduce to help the quality. Another question you should ask yourself is, do I need it to be perfect, or do I need it on Tuesday? So some teachers can get bogged down and trying to have everything just perfect, but how many of your actual live lessons in a classroom have been perfect? Probably not very many. We teach naturally, we teach organically, and we speak to our students in a way that's meaningful to them. Make these videos the same way. Just make them effective content delivery tools. Don't worry about trying to make a Hollywood production out of it.
One of the beauties of the flipped class is it's very scalable. You know what? You don't have to flip a class. You could flip one lesson, or you could flip a unit, or you could flip a whole class. It's scalable. So one recommendation we would have for you is maybe you need to start small and figure out what's the best place to flip. If I were to give you a recommendation of what you should flip if you're looking for a lesson, find something that your kids struggle with. I was working with a group of 4th grade teachers, and we were talking about math, and they said, in unison to me, they said, my kids struggle with long division. I said, that's your first flipped class video, is long division. So what's the equivalent of long division for you? That's your first lesson to flip.
So to recap, make sure all of your students have access to the content.
Make sure you teach them how to watch the videos.
Build in some safeguards to make sure that all students are actually watching the videos.
Don't feel the need to make your videos perfect.
And don't try to do too much all at once. Take it step by step, take it slow, and before long, you'll have flipped your class.
There's so much in there that I agree with. One of the things that I don't particularly like is videoing myself. So I run Windows 10, so I press the Windows button and G, and it gives me Xbox video capture of my screen. Then I'll put on my headset and record the voice, and I will, if I'm describing models, I will circle with my mouse pencil. I will keep the screen with all of the slides set. And when I'm referring back to other parts of things I've mentioned earlier, I can easily go back there. So they're not looking, they don't need to look at me. It's not about me performing. Perhaps the lecture is about me performing, because after all, we have a lectern, we have a lecture theatre, but the video isn't about that. That's about the learning. And it's really interesting, because one of the things that comes up in that is, listen to what your students say about the things that they don't understand as easily as others. That bit you flip, because they can watch it as many times as they wish. They can use the supplementary detail that you add. And so this is about working with the students, and it does come through so much. The next thing we look at is the blending learning model. So we've got different learning theories. So we've looked at flipped, we'll look at blending. Ultimately, this definition is where we mix the different materials, and it's coming back again to the way in which we do so, and the learning toolkits, and there's links to learning toolkits in your slide set. So we'll run this video. Oops, that's good. Here we have it.
Welcome to the Blended Learning Toolkit. Blended learning combines face-to-face classroom methods with online activities to form an integrated approach to teaching. It has changed the way learning is perceived and delivered, and has proven very effective as the focus of the classroom moves from a presentation format to one of active learning. Because the online portion of a course can provide learners with multimedia-rich content at a time and place that suits them, classroom time can then be used more effectively, for instance to cover challenging concepts or to address questions learners may have on a specific topic. Some people believe that making traditional course materials such as presentation slides or lecture notes available online equates to blended learning. However, rather than simply placing your existing content online, you need to redesign what you have in order to create effective online materials, creating the right content for the right type of learning experience. The Blended Learning Toolkit is an open resource for anyone who is interested in getting started with blended learning. The aim of the toolkit is to provide step-by-step practical guidance and links to useful resources for developing your blended learning materials. The toolkit is presented in 4 logical parts. Part 1 is focused on getting familiar with the concept of blended learning and understanding how roles and responsibilities of lecturers are evolving. Part 2 focuses on planning your approach to your blended course design. Part 3 looks at how to develop content and online activities and how to source appropriate media and materials which are readily available online for use in education. Part 4 looks at how to build a standalone online module using various authoring tools which are available. If blended learning is a new concept to you, then you've come to the right place, as the aim of this toolkit is to provide assistance in designing and developing your blended learning materials. Instead of using technology to recreate what you already do in the classroom, we would encourage you to think about opportunities for new ways of working. Why not take a look at our video case studies, which feature lecturers from colleges around Northern Ireland who have used this toolkit to produce some impressive learning materials of their own.
So I can just recap them. We talked about transmission and Biggs's worries about that. We considered the idea of being more constructive and supportive in the way that you approach your design and thinking about aligning the content. I think a lot of what's coming up in the videos fits so well with how I feel personally about learning design. But it really depends on the key aspects of what you're trying to achieve. So at the University of Westminster, we needed to design everything around the use of this simulation game. So the theories were already embedded in there in a practical way. So we had to help the students see where the theory was working in practice. And that's one of the biggest challenges for students in a lot of what they do in a practical world. So we began with the game as the driver for the design. Depending on the digital tools that you use will then depend on the way which you embrace your design. Obviously, it's always about learning outcomes. But how you flip and how you blend really depends on what tools and amenities and books you have access to. So it's quite a challenge, but Connect in McGraw-Hill does some great activities. Using the smart tools gives you great opportunities for learning. And ultimately, we want to be able to benefit from the digital transformation. But I think making a leap too far and being this kind of revolutionary digital transformer can sometimes be a challenge for others because humans evolve and sometimes can take a while to embrace this. There's complementers that are excellent. I have also a role within Pearson Education as a consultant for the development of their digital tools. So I'm not only ever talking about McGraw-Hill, I just, in my own role, have found theirs to be the ones that are the most suitable. Okay, that's in no way, nobody's given me any reason to say that that is my own experience. It's no way, in a reflection. Akash, they are definitely a great provider of tools. You'll see the slide set, so you'll be able to have a look at the video for smart books, unless I have time, but I'm over time and I'm very cautious of that. Does anybody wish to have a quick look at this? Hands up. If I have a fairly, probably not, Akash? Chakra, what do you think? Okay. This is, it doesn't show you much about the interface. It will talk to you about the student experience. This tool is so smart, it remembers where the student has difficulty with particular topics and subjects within the book that they're reading. It will ask questions as it goes along. It will have the student's opportunity to fill in gaps. And where the student isn't able to do so, the book remembers that you had difficulty. You may be in a later stage of the book, which also returns to a topic, and it remembers that previously you had some difficulty with this. Shall we go over it again? It's just amazing, honestly, and developing so well.
Available within McGraw-Hill Education's Connect, SmartBook makes study time as productive and efficient as possible. It identifies and closes knowledge gaps through a continually adapting reading experience. Students and instructors can enjoy convenient anywhere, anytime access to SmartBook with a new and improved mobile interface designed for optimal use on tablets. Users can complete assignments, check progress, study, and read material from anywhere. SmartBook provides students with a view to their reading assignments so that they can focus on that which matters most. Reading with SmartBook empowers the student to engage with content. SmartBook highlights priority areas so that users are focused on the most important learning objectives. A wealth of personalized learning resources are presented at the precise moment of need. Audio, video, and other rich media resources are provided to enhance the learning experience. Practice provides students with the opportunity to answer assessment questions, testing the user's knowledge of recently covered reading material. Based on performance, SmartBook determines the content a student needs to review. This content is brought back via recharge. The new To-Do section of Connect features recharge, which helps ensure that students retain knowledge over a sustained period of time. My Reports provide students with details on their current learning status. This gives instructors the ability to understand the strengths and weaknesses of individual students or their class as a whole. When engaged in SmartBook's continually adapting reading experience, students are guided toward content that has the maximum learning impact. The result? More confidence, better grades, and greater success.
I like the way they talk about learning without limits at McGraw-Hill. I also like the way they talk about personalised learning within mass delivery. And the way I see it, this is really going to sound like a cliche, but it's really important to me because every student matters. I leave it there because students to me really are important, and I love students. I started with that, I finished with that. So we explored digital transformation and making a difference, and teaching and our capabilities using information technology and educational technology. And that is helping us contribute to the science and knowledge society in an amazing way in Open University. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Caroline, for such an interesting presentation, particularly that you touched on very important matters that actually are important to us at the Europe Open University in terms of motivating the students, particularly in the blended learning institution where there is 75% of independent learning. And you gave very important tips, actually, that I jotted down that we'll try to disseminate to the tutors who are not here, because we are always worried about the students being able to do their work on their own, how to motivate them. And you gave like probably 4 or 5 tips that are really important. Thank you very much for that. We invite any questions, and then we'll move on to some coffee. All right? Yes, any questions?
Do you take the mic? Most people that would like to give a question? Sorry. We'll give out the mic for anyone that would like to give a question. Or comments too. I'm very open to your thoughts and things that you have to say.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really fruitful. I have actually a question regarding the students' learning styles. I have conducted a study here in the university recently. I have found that the students here in the higher education students, they prefer the structured assessment, computer-based structured assessment, which the McGraw-Hill approve or use in another way in the smart books and the assessment. This is the important thing. This is the important model of assessment, or the most important part in McGraw-Hill, is in my opinion. So, what are the techniques that the McGraw-Hill use to produce such exams by using the structured-based assessment? I know there's some softwares they are using it. The other thing is the new techniques, which is the automatic item generation technique. I know that McGraw-Hill recently in 2018 start contacting and start deploying this technology to produce exams questions, and this is the strength of the McGraw-Hill, by the way. Most of that what you have present in flipping classrooms and so on, it doesn't match with the higher education system. We can use most of the staff here. They have experience more than 10 years in blended learning. Most of the topics you have presented, the theoretical ideas, we know about it. We know how to use this technology in the classroom.
Can I just stop you just for 1 minute, because I need to know more about what your question is. I believe it's about the assessment rationale and the formal structured assessment design as opposed to learning design.
What McGraw-Hill, if you just teach us.
Okay, let me respond. If we think about whether we're trying to present knowledge to students that is then a test of their knowledge and a direct examination, so here's the knowledge, here's the exam, here's the mark, that presents learning as a process of, in a sense, partly surface and less depth, because some of what we want to be able to do with that knowledge, particularly in business schools in the future, is to be able to design a curriculum that meets the needs of business, to include things such as marketing skills, operation skills, financial skills, people and human resource management skills, and ethical business management, sustainability. So we have quite a broad range of skill, kind of topical areas and disciplines that we need to cover. And the testing of the models and the testing of the categoric, factual, scientific detail has been very well designed by McGraw-Hill education, particularly in terms of how you can use smart books. You can actually you can extract a body of questions based on particular textbooks with particular facts and theory that then can present itself as a randomized test that then can be used in the assessment process at a distance for students. The difficulty that I have with that, though, is that then that knowledge is kind of static, and that students for the future need to be working in a more complex world that actually isn't always absolute, can be unpredictable, can be complex, and through the learning process, the ability to enable them to answer a question. So how we do it at Westminster is we have an examination as well as a portfolio. So it's the design of the assessment, which actually came up within what I was talking about, is the biggest challenge. How do we take this body of learning over, say, a 12-week series or a 200-hour credit unit and turn that into an assessed piece of activity that can both develop practical capability but substantiate and give us evidence of what you know. And we can do multiple choice questions quickly. We can do short answers quickly. And remember, with a mass delivery, this needs to be efficient. It's the more peculiar, in a sense, it depends what subjects we're testing. And in mathematics, it's kind of easier to test, and we have Alex that does that really well. The subjects that are less quantifiable are much harder to design the assessment process for.
Sorry, but for contributing you, but I think this is the most important part. McGraw-Hill should share with us. We should hold some collaboration to just teach us the techniques of producing exams and the questions. This is the most important thing.
I agree. Today's session...
Actually, from the title of this presentation, I'm expecting to see some demonstration about the techniques, the software, so on, regarding producing exams, but it was different.
Absolutely. And because these would be peculiar to your particular course, your particular learning style, your student's style, that's the interventions that, I mean, imagine, this is the thing about personalizing learning, personalizing sessions. The delivery of a broad scope offering is narrowed down to how you, as the academic, would like your content to be. So the broad brush is you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, but we come and we sit with you and we say, what is it you would like to achieve? What means do you currently have? What else can we add to make the difference for your students? Because in the end, this is about your students' ability to become more knowledgeable, but to become able to use that knowledge in the world in which they then will be finding things a little complex, finding things challenging, and often using gamification is really good. It depends what topics you're covering.
I have just one question. Does McGraw-Hill now use the smart programs from in producing exams questions? I know that using computer-based structured assessment and the IAG. What about the smart softwares? Do they reach to this point or not yet?
Akash, sorry, do you want to take the mic?
Tell us what the courses and the just brief about.
So, not entirely sure what you exactly mean by smart assessments, but if I were to get my terminology right, that would be something along the lines of algorithmic questions. That would be so something that what you're telling me is something that adapts to a student specifically. Just one student has their own learning path. Yes, there's various platforms that we have available for that. So one of them is known as Alex, which Caroline touched upon earlier. This is more so to do with math and chemistry. So obviously you're not going to be able to do that for qualitative subjects. That's something that's going to be very difficult to do. But it's for math and for chemistry, and we have it available. As you can see, the smart book, for example, is also something that's personalized learning. It's for a student to be able to learn at his own pace with questions that are asked based on what he knows and what he doesn't know.
I think, sorry to interrupt, Akash. I think this really needs so much more exploring, and Akash and myself, if you can take your details, we'd be very happy to have a look at what your course is, what you'd like to have in learning outcomes, and how we can design the assessment activity that kind of synchronizes with your learning activity, but in a way how the learning activity may need to also change to adapt to what the student does, rather than this idea that the tests as set by the tutor is more about what the tutor does. And that was hopefully what I was trying to get across today. But please, let's set up a meeting, let's have a look at what you've got, and let's move that forward, because it sounds as though you really want to, actually. Thank you.
Hi, hello. I just wanted to thank you for the rich presentation, and it opens up a lot of horizons. I mean, you were talking about business and the challenge that you had, but gamification is one point that you mentioned that's applicable to language learning. Interestingly, that drew my attention. I never thought of gamification as language and vocabulary learning, which is something, I mean, you were talking about it in terms of business, but something that we can consider in terms of literature and language.
Actually, that's a really good point, because it gives them a standard way, a consistent way. When you have a very broad range, we've got the most international scope in Westminster, the broadest range of different international perspectives in our student body, and the ways that they describe things and the words that they use are very different. But and the teachers then are very different. So we get a degree of consistency because Amanda is one person.
Yeah.
And she says the same thing every time.
It's and we're I mean they're trying to introduce that as a skill, because language is no longer, you cannot open a dictionary and learn a set of vocabulary or just fill in the blanks, and students end up not able to use their language or apply it efficiently in business fields or in literature, or I mean just to be able to use it skillfully and individualize the use of language.
I really like what you're saying there, and in a way it concerns me, because I don't want to narrow down how people see things. Because as a tutor, I should be able to understand how a different perspective in a different part of the world that runs business uses different vocabulary.
And be able to apply it. So the idea of using smart books and asking the questions, and so I think we can explore that option of individualizing learning in a way. So hopefully, yes, we can explore these options. But I wanted to ask a very technical question. The smart books are available to students who are not enrolled in a course, or are they, or do these
I think
books?
you can get open access to smart books.
They are not enrolled in a specific course, but the way it works over here, the way, especially at Arab Open University, all students access material through the LMS. Through the LMS, right? And
Learner management system. Sorry,
if they're going to access it through Moodle, then in that case they're going to have that course assigned to them. But I mean, obviously these are discussions that we can have later on as well, and we can definitely have a conversation outside of this, and I'm more than happy to inform you of ways that we can work around that. Absolutely, and you know, it's I mean.
And open access to, this isn't McGraw-Hill, sorry Akash, but open access to something called Future Learn. It's growing, so I'm not sure if you can get access from here, but do have a look, Future Learn. And it's brilliant. And you can choose to learn, and then if you wish to, you can choose to add the assessment activity at the end. But that's premium. You pay for the assessment.
Thank you very much, Ms. Caroline.
Thank you,
Let's
Shakra.
have some coffee, please, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, everybody. I do appreciate it. Thank you. Sorry, I'm just going to take this.
I'll just only stop this one.